You know that when you're running a family therapy session or about to run a therapy session, you're there to work with the entire family. But families arrive to your office often with the mindset that one person is the problem, and it's an enormous struggle to get the family to see how they all contribute to the problem. So what are the structural family therapy techniques we're supposed to use to help with this? Well, it's what Minuchin called complementarity. Complementarity is the notion that reflects this really big systemic idea that family members are not just separate people reacting to each other, they're also parts of a larger relational pattern where each person's behavior organizes and influences the behaviors of other people. Or the way that I have to dumb this down in order to understand it for myself is that nobody's doing the pattern alone. Everybody has a part in keeping it going, even when nobody intends to. In this video, I'm going to give you a 4-part, step-by-step breakdown of how to actually use complementarity in a session next week. And if we've not met before, my name is Oliver. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here in Los Angeles. I love helping people understand structural family systems because it completely changed the way that I work with families, the way that I think about families, and relationships in general. So if you want me to make an explainer video on any part of family systems theory, leave me a comment. I love hearing from you and it lets me know what I should make the next video on. Okay, the visual takeaway here is that we are watching a performance, but if we only focus on one actor, we miss the entire show. And it's very easy to focus on the dancer or the performer with the symptom, the angry dancer, the withdrawn actor. But a structural family therapist watches how the whole dance is choreographed and organized. If you only focus on one person on stage, you miss the whole thing. So the first move here is to expand the problem. Along with this first rule, we have to remember that every symptom has a function. It does something for the family. Usually that's something to do with regulating how distant or how close people are, or sometimes about rerouting conflict. The other big thing is that it needs more than one person to keep it running. When a family comes in and says, that's the depressed one, that's the difficult one, the more useful question to ask yourself over what is wrong with them is what is the symptom accomplishing and who is on the payroll? Here's 3 examples to help bring it to life. Let's say a family says their teenage son has issues around food, and every evening his mother spends 2 hours preparing the food, cutting it, coaching them to eat it all. The family will tell you that the problem in the family is his eating. But when you zoom out, you'll see that this nightly ritual is actually the one job that keeps the mother completely occupied with her son. And more importantly, disconnected from a marriage that perhaps is really uncomfortable, perhaps is lost its spark, or there's a lot of conflict in. So the function is the function of this symptom isn't really about nutrition or eating, it's actually about holding the parents at a safe distance from each other. Who's on the payroll? Mom, the kid, and the dad. So the second example is a couple who comes in and one partner is flat, withdrawn, maybe they even describe him as being depressed. But when you zoom out again, what you find is that when you zoom out, what you'll find is that one partner only stops criticizing and attacking the partner when the other is depressed or low or withdrawn. So one partner's depression is the only thing that can actually buy care and support instead of contempt. So the function is all about regulating closeness. And who's on the payroll? Both of them. Final example here is another family. So the final example here is a family who points to their 7-year-old who has explosive tantrums around dinner. His behavior is the problem, according to the parents, but when you zoom out again, what you'll notice is that the explosions seem to happen when mum and dad get home, and that's when they start bickering. The second he has one of these meltdowns, they stop bickering and start fussing over him. So his tantrums is actually a way to detour conflict between mum and dad. The function is to keep the parents from going at it. Who's on the payroll? Everyone. So those are 3 different presenting problems with 3 different functions: distance, closeness, and detouring conflict. But in each one, the symptom is employing everyone in the family. Step number 2, re-punctuate, don't re-inform. This is an actual skill here. You don't change anything about the facts or the information you're given. You take the exact same reality and just cut it in a different way. You replate the food. What you're doing is replating the same dish and serving it differently, including an aspect of relationships. So you turn it from something about a self into something about relationships. When someone says, I am depressed, what you'd say is, oh, who makes you the most depressed? Describing the same thing, one puts the trouble inside one person though, the other sort of situates it between 2 people. Now, we're not arguing, we're not adding information, we're not assigning any blame, we're just redrawing the boundary around where the problem lives. This is kind of freeing because it means you don't need to win a debate, you don't need to know more than you do, you just need to ask one question that includes another person. All right, so here's 3 examples again, 3 recuts, re-edits. Let's say a dad opens with something like, it's all my fault, I work too much. We're not going to reassure him. We're not going to explore the guilt. We just recut it, reserve it, and say something like, well, I wouldn't be so sure about that because if this were to keep going, who in the family would get you home sooner? Who in the family would keep you at work? So we're moving the problem from inside his guilt and self-attack to between him and other people in the family. Another example is a mother who says, my son never listens to me. We're going to take that information and just serve it in a different way. And this one is a bit harder. So you might say something like, well, who does he listen to? A question like that stops the problem being a trait in the child and turns it into a question about relationships. Who is lined up with who? Who isn't helpful? Who does he listen to? The final example is, let's imagine a teen who says, I'm just an anxious person. I always have been. Well, again, this is a bit challenging. You don't agree or disagree. You just say something like, who is around you when your anxiety is at its worst? So we're turning a fixed statement of, I am just an anxious person, which is all about labels and identity, into a relational event. It's now got a time, a place, a cast. It's different. So none of these adds new facts, right? We're just handing the same information back, just served differently in the form of a relationship versus an individual. Step number 3 is about expanding the context and avoiding blame. One thing I know from doing a lot of family work is that you'll meet some resistance, people who want to blame themselves, if not someone else. It's much less anxiety provoking to blame yourself or another person than it is to consider that problems in your family or relationships are actually influenced by others, or to just not know why the symptom is there. If you were to insist that the depression or anxiety just does not live in one person and say something like, I really don't think that the depression is just about you, there is some relational aspect to this, which I have absolutely said in sessions, that person is going to push back and say, no, it's me, it's all my fault, I'm not motivated, or it's just a chemical imbalance. Whatever they say, they want to own that blame. If you insist Johnny's depression is absolutely a result of the relationships at home, they are going to double down and resist it. So what you do instead, roll with the resistance and also expand the ownership. The discipline is always going to be the same. We're going to accept that the person wants to blame themselves for now, and then widen it to include another person. So here's 3 variations. Let's say you're working with a client who won't give up his depression or just thinks that he is depressed just because. No, it's just who I am. This is just me. It's a chemical imbalance. My mum's got depression. My great-grandfather's got depression. Getting it wrong would sound like, well, surely your partner plays a part in this too. He will dig in. So what you do instead, you say something like, of course it's yours. I'm just curious to know who in your family it's heavier around, who makes it lighter. We're allowing him to own the self-blame, but expanding it a bit. The goal is to say something that creates mutual context, not mutual blame. So when someone says, I've always been the anxious one in this family, you're not going to argue with this. You say something like, I believe you. But when it's at its worst, who's in the room and what are they doing? Okay, allowing that person to still be the anxious one in the family, but we're expanding it a little bit. And then a kid who says, I'm just the screw up in the family. This is harder because we're going to have to resist that reflex to save him. I might say something like, okay, whose life gets easier when you're a screw up? Right? Same sort of thing, not rescuing him, allowing him to own the blame, but expanding it slightly. Move number 4 is let's experiment. In structural family therapy, the family has to experience the pattern as well as hear about it, and preferably experience it over hear about it. So the move is to widen the frame until everybody sees it. Like, the more you pursue this person, the more they distance themselves, and the more they distance themselves, the more they pursue, right? Classic distance a pursuer behavioral loop. The more time you spend at work, the more angry your wife is when you get home, and the more angry your wife is, the more she picks on your son about doing homework. And then when you get home, it feels so uncomfortable that you work more the next night. Regardless of what pattern you're describing, you have to try and include everyone in the room. Then you need to expand it with an experiment where 2 or more people change their behaviors. So let's see if we can experiment with this. How about, Dad, you come home at a reasonable hour, and instead of your wife getting your son to do your homework, you do it. Mom, your job is to have a bath. I would try and get 2 people to change their behaviors rather than just one. Mum's been working too hard, doing the homework and cooking dinner, so let's give her a spa hour in the bath. I worked with a family once where the mother was the disciplinarian and the dad was the fun guy. And in the session, the kid ran out of the office and started playing in the corridor. So we did an experiment. I got both parents to go and get the kid back in the office. Another family I worked with seemed to speak on behalf of each other, and it was really quite a simple experiment to turn this into a game and get each of them not to speak for another person for the next 5 minutes. And we turned it into a competition to see who could do it longest. The point is, we've got to reorganize the system a little bit, and you can't do that with one person. You've got to try and include everyone. Move number 5 is don't trust the first change you see. If you start nudging in the way that we're describing with this technique, you'll get a quick change, hopefully, and everyone will feel happy, but be prepared for things to snap back into place. Right? The system needs to reorganize to protect itself. The function of the symptom is protecting the family, albeit in a very dysfunctional way. So before you celebrate, it might be worth asking yourself, did a behavior change or did the pattern change? I think there's 3 ways you can tell if it's a behavior, because what we want the pattern to change, not just someone's behavior. Unless we want the pattern to change, not just one person's behavior. And I think there's 3 ways you can tell. Dad suddenly stops working so much and comes home early, but in a few weeks his wife has got a new thing to complain about, or there's a new problem with the son. Maybe the kid who's angry doesn't act out as much, but suddenly the sibling starts having meltdowns. Or a couple that you're working with comes back and says, oh, we're not fighting anymore, but now we're not having sex. The behaviors just shift around the same patterns, right? We've changed the behaviors, not the structure of the family. That means that you're on the right track, but you've still got a bit more work to do. Whatever the problem is, it's never about the problem, right? So Dad coming home earlier or later, it wasn't about the fact that he was working too much. It was about the fact that he's not involved in parenting, or that their relationship is on the rocks. The kid that was angry and had all those blow-ups, the problem wasn't really about his behaviors. The problem is he was having those blow-ups because mum and dad were bickering at each other. So again, it's a sign you're on the right tracks, but you might have more work to do. You know you've made real change when the whole choreography of the family changes, not just one person. If that was helpful to you, please think about hitting subscribe or like, or even better, joining the Family Systems Hit newsletter I send out each week. I would love to hear from you. I'd love for you to share this with your friends, and I will see you in the next one.